The first time they tied me up, I was 5 years old. I remember the scratchy fibers of the rope biting into my wrists, the way my tiny hands trembled as I tried to pull free. My mother's hands were cold and firm as she knotted the restraints around my wrists. Her face was emotionless, but her voice held a quiet urgency. "Stop crying," she whispered, tightening the ropes. "This is for your own good." My father stood nearby, watching. He held his belt in one hand, tapping it against his palm with slow, deliberate movements. I didn't understand why he was so calm, why this was happening at all. My chest heaved with uneven breaths, my sobs breaking in the dim candlelight of our small, cluttered house. "Strong children survive," he said. His voice was deep, steady, unforgiving. "Weak ones don't." The first strike landed on my back, and I remember gasping, my body jerking against the restraints. Pain burned hot across my skin, and my tiny fingers curled into fists. I screamed for my mother, begged her to stop him. But she only stepped back, folding her arms across her chest. I thrashed. I pulled. The ropes wouldn't budge. I don't remember how long it lasted, only that the world felt smaller and darker when it was over. I lay on the floor, my face pressed against the cold wooden planks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My father stepped over me, tossing the belt onto the table. "Get up." I couldn't. "Get up," he repeated, his voice sharper now. I struggled to my knees, my body aching, my hands still bound. I wanted to speak, to ask why, but the words caught in my throat. My mother untied the ropes, her fingers moving with precision. She never met my eyes. "Good boy," my father muttered before walking away. That was the first time. It wasn't the last. The days turned to weeks. The ropes turned to chains. At first, I fought. Every time they bound my hands, I kicked and screamed. I cursed them in the only way a child knew how, wildly, desperately, with everything I had. But fighting only made it worse. The punishments became harsher. My father's belt was replaced with a leather strap, the cracks against my skin sharper, more precise. My mother no longer whispered reassurances. She only watched, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. I stopped crying. Tears didn't help. They only made him angrier. I stopped speaking. Words were useless. Nothing I said could change the rules of this house. I learned to survive. There were lessons, always. Every action had a consequence. Every mistake had a punishment. If I spoke out of turn, I was locked in the dark room beneath the stairs. If I disobeyed, I was forced to kneel on raw rice for hours, my knees screaming, my body trembling. But the worst was the chains. They came when I was 7. My father said ropes were for animals, and I was old enough to learn real discipline. The first time he shackled my wrists, I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. "Chains don't break," he said, yanking them tight. "You'll learn." He left me there, bound to the iron loop embedded in the wall. I didn't know how long I sat in that position, my body stiff, my shoulders aching. Time blurred. The walls of the small room seemed to close in on me. That night, hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I didn't cry. I stared at the floor, counting the cracks in the wooden planks. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, even when fear clawed at my throat. I learned that silence was safer than rebellion. I learned that stillness was better than defiance. My mother brought me food the next morning. A single piece of bread, dry and crumbling, and a cup of water. "Eat," she said, kneeling beside me. I hesitated before taking the bread with my bound hands. My wrists ached from the metal, my fingers stiff. She watched me, her expression unreadable. "Why?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and ran her fingers over the metal shackles, her touch feather-light. "Because the world is cruel," she murmured, "and weak people don't survive." She stood up and left the room without another word. I spent years in those chains. Not always physically, but they were there, wrapped around me, sinking into my skin like a second layer. By the time I was 10, I had learned the rules of the house well enough to avoid the worst punishments. I kept my head down. I obeyed. I did what was expected. But deep inside, something had shifted. I was no longer the crying, desperate child who pleaded for freedom. I was something else now, something quiet, something patient. I stopped thinking of escape, not because I had given up, but because I understood that survival wasn't about running. It was about waiting, watching, learning. One evening, when I was 11, I heard my mother and father arguing. Their voices were muffled through the thin walls, but I caught enough to understand. "She's gone," my mother said, her voice tight with fear. She got out. My heart slammed against my ribs. My sister. The one person in the house who still whispered to me in the dark, who still held my hand when the punishments were too much. She had escaped, and they hadn't caught her. I listened to the sound of my father pacing. His boots hit the floor in slow, heavy steps. If she tells anyone. She won't, my mother interrupted quickly. She knows better. A long silence. Then my father exhaled sharply. It doesn't matter. The boy stays. A chill ran down my spine. The boy. Not my son. Not our child. Just the boy. I understood then, in a way I never had before. I was not their son. I was something to be controlled. Owned. Kept in chains. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my wrists still raw from the last time my father had locked the shackles around them. My sister had made it out. She had broken free. If she could escape, so could I. But not yet. Not until I was ready. The house was never a home. It was a prison, not just for me, but for anyone who ever stepped inside. From the outside, it looked ordinary enough. A worn-down farmhouse with peeling white paint, a sagging roof, and a rusted swing set in the backyard. To the neighbors, it was just another forgotten place in a forgotten town. A house no one paid much attention to. But inside, it was a different world entirely. The air was thick with silence, heavy and suffocating. Every floorboard creaked like a warning. The windows were shut tight, the curtains drawn, as if the house itself was trying to keep its secrets buried. There was no laughter here, no warmth, no safety. Only rules. Rules that could never be broken. No talking unless spoken to. No wandering the house after dark. No touching anything that isn't yours. No questioning your parents. No mistakes. The punishments for breaking the rules varied. Some were swift and brutal, a slap, a belt, a night locked in the basement. Others were slower, more insidious. Days without food. Hours kneeling on the cold, splintering wood floor. Chained to the radiator, forced to listen to my own stomach growl in protest. But there were worse things than the punishments. There were the rooms. The locked doors that lined the hallway. The ones we weren't allowed to open. The ones we weren't even supposed to look at. I remember the first time I got too close. I was 6, maybe 7, creeping through the hall on tiptoes, my breath caught in my throat. My fingers brushed against the cold brass handle of one of the forbidden doors. It clicked open. Just a sliver. Just enough for me to see inside. Darkness. A shape. A shadow shifting against the wall. And then a voice. Small. Shaking. Help me. I never saw who it was. I never got the chance. Before I could react, a hand yanked me backward, fingers digging into my shoulders so hard it bruised. My father. His face was unreadable, his grip unyielding. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. You don't open doors in this house, he said. Then he dragged me down the hall, threw me into the basement, and locked the door behind me. The basement was the worst place of all. No windows. No light. Only the sound of rats scurrying in the corners and the damp smell of mildew soaking into my skin. This was where the real punishments happened. The ones that left marks. Sometimes, my father would come down with the belt. Other times, he brought the chain, wrapping it around my wrists, pulling it tight until my fingers went numb. I learned to count the minutes in the dark. I learned to make my breathing slow, to disappear inside my own mind, to go somewhere else. Somewhere safe. But there was no safety in that house. Not for me. Not for anyone. I wasn't the only one trapped there. There was my mother, though she had long since given up fighting. I used to think she was a victim, too. That she was just as much a prisoner as I was. But I was wrong. She didn't stop him. She never did. She let it happen. She tightened the ropes. She brought the food when I was locked away, slipping the plate through the slot at the bottom of the door, her face empty, her hands steady. And then there was my sister. She was older than me by 3 years, and for as long as I could remember, she had been the only light in that house. She whispered stories to me at night when our parents weren't listening. She held my hand after the beatings, her grip tight and warm, as if she could somehow take the pain away. But even she was afraid. She obeyed. She followed the rules. Because she knew what happened when you didn't. Until the night she ran. I don't know how she did it. One morning, she was just gone. Her bed was empty. Her closet half open, clothes missing. My parents searched for her, screaming her name, tearing through the house like wild animals. But she was gone. I never saw her again. I didn't know if she made it. I didn't know if she got far enough away, if she was safe. I only knew one thing. If I didn't escape, I would die in that house. After she left, things got worse. My father became paranoid, convinced I would run next. He locked my bedroom door at night. He kept the basement key in his pocket. He watched me constantly, his eyes cold and calculating. And my mother, she stopped speaking to me entirely. I was alone, and in that loneliness, something inside me shifted. I stopped dreaming of escape. I started planning it. I watched. I listened. I learned their habits, their weaknesses. I took note of the times my father left the house, of when my mother was too distracted to notice me slipping past her. I started taking things, small at first, things they wouldn't miss. Coins from my father's jacket, a knife from the kitchen drawer. I practiced. At night, when the house was silent, I slipped my hands in and out of knots, testing the tightness of the ropes they used. I rubbed my wrists raw against the metal shackles, searching for weaknesses. I learned patience, because patience was the only way I would survive. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, eating the bland, tasteless stew my mother had placed in front of me, my father spoke. "You'll never leave this house." I froze, the spoon halfway to my lips. "Your sister thought she could run, but she was wrong." His eyes met mine, dark and knowing. "If you try to follow her, I'll find you, and you'll wish I hadn't." I forced myself to swallow the bite of food, ignoring the way my stomach twisted. I nodded, my face blank, my hands steady, because I knew something he didn't. I wasn't my sister. I wasn't going to run blindly into the night, hoping for freedom. I was going to make sure they never had power over me again. I was going to end them first. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something sour, something rotten. The house was always filled with that stifling smell, a mixture of mildew, sweat, and secrets buried so deep they festered. But tonight, the scent was stronger. The air felt heavier, pressing against my skin like an invisible hand, suffocating. I sat at the edge of my bed, my ears tuned to the quiet creaks of the house, listening. My father's boots echoed down the hallway. Slow, steady. I held my breath. He was going to the basement. I knew before I even saw the chains. I stood and crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. The heavy clink of metal against metal sent a ripple of ice down my spine. My fingers curled into fists. I had seen those chains before. I had felt them before. But tonight, something was different. They were for me. A cold certainty settled into my bones. My father had decided. I was getting too old, too unpredictable. I wasn't bending the way he wanted me to. He needed to break me before I became a real problem. I had two choices. I could let him, or I could end this first. My heartbeat was a steady drum in my ears as I slipped out of my room. The hallway stretched before me, dimly lit by the single flickering bulb near the stairs. The house groaned like it was alive, shifting beneath my feet, warning me. I ignored it. My father's back was turned, his broad shoulders hunched as he unraveled the length of chain. His hands moved with practiced ease, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. I had never seen my sister's chains, but I knew they existed. I had never seen what lay beyond those locked doors, but I knew they held something terrible. My father's rules weren't just about control. They were about possession, and I was done being something he owned. I moved quickly, silent, precise. I stepped into the kitchen, my bare feet light against the cold tile. My fingers wrapped around the handle of the knife, the one I had been sharpening in secret, waiting for the right moment. The blade was small, but sharp. I wasn't strong enough to fight him, but I was fast, and I was desperate, and desperate people did dangerous things. I turned back toward the hallway. My breath was steady. My hands were steady. For the first time in my life, I felt in control. He didn't hear me coming. The chain clattered to the floor as I moved. He turned, eyes narrowing, but he was too slow. I was already there, the knife glinting in the dim light. I swung. The blade met flesh. A sharp, guttural sound tore from his throat as he staggered backward. I saw the surprise in his eyes, the disbelief. He had never considered this a possibility. Me, fighting back. Me, winning. His hand shot out, fingers curling around my wrist, squeezing until pain lanced up my arm. The knife slipped from my grip, clattering to the floor. I gasped, struggling, but he was stronger. He always had been. His other hand raised. A fist this time. No belt. No chain. Just him. I had seen that look before. I had felt what came after. But this time, I didn't cower. This time, I didn't beg. I fought. I twisted, my knee jerking upward, connecting with his stomach. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. My hands flew to the table, fingers scrambling for anything. And then I found it. The heavy glass ashtray. I didn't think. I swung. Glass met skull with a sickening crack. My father stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him. He hit the floor. Hard. Silence. My breath came in ragged gasps, my pulse a wild thing in my chest. He didn't move. I stared at his body, at the blood pooling beneath his head, thick and dark against the wooden floorboards. My hand shook, the glass ashtray slipping from my grip, shattering beside him. This was it. The moment everything changed. I took a step back, my mind racing. The rules had always been clear. There was no winning in this house. There was no escaping punishment. If he got up, I was dead. If my mother found out, I was dead. I had to finish this. I swallowed hard, my hands clenching into fists. I had never killed anything before. Not even the rats in the basement. But I had seen death. I had seen what happened when my father lost his temper. I wasn't going to give him a chance to wake up. I wasn't going to let him take that last breath. I moved toward him, reaching for the knife. And then, a sound. Footsteps. I froze. My mother stood at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes wide. She had seen everything. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I waited for her to scream, to rush forward, to slap me the way she always did when I stepped out of line. But she didn't. She didn't move at all. Her gaze shifted to my father, to the blood, to the knife in my hand. And then she did something I didn't expect. She turned away. Just like that. She walked back down the hall, her footsteps slow, deliberate. She didn't run. She didn't rush to check if he was alive. She just left, as if she had been waiting for this, as if she already knew how it would end. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the knife. I grabbed the money from my father's jacket. And I ran. I didn't stop to pack. I didn't stop to think. I just ran. Out the back door. Through the yard. Over the fence. My breath burned in my lungs, my legs a blur beneath me. The night swallowed me whole, the stars distant, uncaring. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I was never coming back. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I had nothing but the clothes on my back, a stolen knife, and the crumpled bills I had taken from my father's jacket. My feet pounded against the dirt road, my breath ragged, my pulse wild. I ran until my legs burned, until my lungs screamed for air. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The night was thick with silence, the world stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no streetlights, no distant headlights cutting through the dark. Just the sound of my footsteps and the echo of my own heartbeat. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to disappear. By the time I finally slowed, my body was drenched in sweat. I was in the woods now, the trees towering around me, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The cold air bit at my skin, seeping through my thin shirt, but I barely noticed. I sank onto a fallen log, my legs trembling beneath me. My hands were still sticky with my father's blood. I stared at them, at the smears of red beneath my nails, the drying streaks across my wrists. I had done it. I had fought back. But I wasn't safe. Not yet. I needed a plan. I had spent years preparing for this moment. Watching. Waiting. Learning. I knew my parents' routines better than they did. I knew which doors creaked, which floorboards betrayed even the softest footsteps. I knew where they kept their money, how much they had hidden away, how often they checked it. I had been stealing from them for months, little by little. A few bills tucked into my sock. A handful of coins slipped into my pocket. They never noticed. They never suspected. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. And I needed to go back. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed the fear down. I couldn't leave without money, without supplies. If I did, I wouldn't last a week. I had to be smart. I had to be patient. I would go back before dawn, when they were still asleep. I knew my father wouldn't wake easily, not after the blow I had dealt him. And my mother, she had already made her choice. She wouldn't stop me. I gripped the knife tighter, my fingers wrapping around the hilt. It was the only thing keeping my hands steady, the only thing reminding me that I had power now. I wasn't a prisoner anymore. I was a predator. The hours dragged by, the night stretching long and unforgiving. I stayed hidden beneath the trees, my breath visible in the cold air. My mind replayed the moment over and over, the knife slicing through flesh, the sickening crack of the glass ashtray against his skull. I had always imagined what it would feel like to hurt him. I had thought it would bring me relief, satisfaction. But all I felt was nothing. Not fear, not regret. Just an empty, echoing silence. Maybe that was worse. When the sky began to lighten, I knew it was time. I moved quickly, retracing my steps, my heartbeat steady, but my fingers twitching with adrenaline. The house loomed ahead, dark and still. I crouched low, my breath shallow, my ears tuned for any sign of movement inside. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, I crept toward the back door. It was never locked. My father didn't believe in locks, not for the people inside. He thought fear was enough to keep us trapped. He was wrong. I slipped inside, the familiar scent of stale air and something rotten curling around me. My muscles tensed, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, but I forced myself to move. The house felt different now. Smaller. Weaker. Like it wasn't a monster anymore. Just a rotting cage I was finally breaking free from. I went straight for the stash. Under the floorboard in the kitchen. The one with the small scratch near the edge. I pried it open, my fingers finding the envelope hidden beneath. My father's emergency money. He had always been paranoid about banks, about anyone having power over him. He hoarded cash, convinced that money meant control. And now, it meant my freedom. I stuffed the bills into my pocket without counting. It didn't matter how much there was, I was taking it all. Then I grabbed food. Only what I could carry. Bread. A few cans. A bottle of water. Every second I spent inside felt like a countdown to disaster, but I forced myself to stay calm. I was almost done. Almost gone. But then, a sound. A slow creak from the hallway. I froze. Footsteps. Soft. Careful. Not my father. My mother. I turned, my heart hammering, my grip tightening around the knife. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands wrapped around the edge of her sweater like she was cold. Her eyes flickered to the open floorboard, to the food in my hands. But she didn't move. She just watched me. For a long moment, we stared at each other. And then she spoke. Take it. Her voice was quiet. Almost tired. I didn't answer. I didn't move. She took a step forward, her bare feet silent against the wood. Her gaze shifted to my hands, to the knife. If you don't go now, you never will, she murmured. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My pulse roared in my ears. He'll kill you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her lips pressed together. She didn't deny it. But she didn't stop me, either. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled something out. A folded piece of paper. She held it out to me, her fingers trembling just slightly. Your sister, she said. Where she went. My stomach clenched. My vision blurred for half a second. I took the paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. An address. A city I didn't recognize. My mother exhaled, stepping back. Go, she whispered. I didn't wait. I turned. I ran. The sun was rising when I reached the road. The house stood behind me, dark and silent. For the first time in my life, I wasn't inside it. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't surviving. I was free. And I was never going back. The night had been endless. My legs ached from running, my lungs raw from the cold air, but I couldn't stop. The house was still too close. The past was still breathing down my neck. I needed distance. I needed to erase every trace of myself from that place. But distance wasn't enough. I needed to destroy it. I had spent my whole life inside those walls, learning their weaknesses, memorizing every inch of their decay. And now, I was going to use that knowledge to make sure no one else ever suffered inside them again. The house had taken everything from me. Now, I would take everything from it. I spent the day hiding in the woods, my back pressed against the rough bark of a tree, my hands clenched into fists. The note my mother had given me burned a hole in my pocket. My sister. She had made it out. She had survived. Somewhere in the world, she was free, living a life without chains, without fear. I wanted that life, too. But I knew I wouldn't truly be free until the house was nothing but ash. Until my father had nothing left to hold over me. Until there was nothing left to go back to. The sky was black by the time I made my way back. The house sat in the distance, silent, waiting. It looked smaller than I remembered, weaker. It had always seemed like an unbreakable fortress, a monster with its doors for a mouth and its walls for ribs. But now, I saw it for what it was. Rotten. Crumbling. Something that could be destroyed. I moved carefully, stepping around the brittle leaves and broken twigs that lined the yard. My father was still inside, recovering from the blow I had dealt him. My mother, I wasn't sure about. Maybe she was asleep. Maybe she had already left, the same way my sister had. It didn't matter. Tonight, I was the one making the rules. I slipped into the back shed, my fingers moving fast, searching. My father kept everything there, tools, gasoline, old rags soaked in oil. It was as if he had been preparing for his own downfall without realizing it. The gas can was heavy in my hands, the smell sharp and familiar. I had seen my father use it before. To burn trash, to kill weeds, to mark territory the way a wild animal would. But tonight, it was mine to use. I carried it back toward the house, my movements steady. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The first splash of gasoline hit the porch, darkening the old wood, filling the air with its acrid scent. I moved quickly, dousing the door, the walls, the edges of the broken windows. Inside, I could hear the low hum of the television. My father must have been awake, too weak to get out of bed but strong enough to sit in his chair, pretending he still controlled everything. He didn't know. He had no idea that his kingdom was already crumbling beneath him. I emptied the last of the gasoline along the base of the house, then stepped back. The wind stirred around me, carrying the scent of fuel through the trees. My pulse was slow, steady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the matchbook. It was an old one, taken from the kitchen drawer months ago, back when I had started planning my escape. I had never known exactly what I would use it for, but now I did. I struck the first match. The tiny flame flickered, casting an orange glow against my fingers. I let it fall. The fire caught instantly, a bright spark that spread hungrily along the soaked wood. It climbed the walls, licking at the windows, curling around the doorframe like an embrace. The house screamed. The old wood crackled and groaned, the heat warping it from the inside out. Smoke billowed into the night sky, thick and choking. I stepped back, watching. The fire spread fast, faster than I had expected. It devoured everything in its path, rushing through the house with a fury that matched my own. Then, from inside, a shout. My father. I heard him moving, stumbling. I pictured him in his chair, his mind slow from pain, his body sluggish. He wouldn't understand at first. He would smell the smoke, feel the heat, and think it was a dream. Then reality would sink in. Then the panic would set in. I stood still, watching as the fire climbed higher. I didn't move when I heard his footsteps. I didn't move when the front door banged open, when he staggered onto the porch, coughing, his eyes wild. His gaze met mine. For a split second, there was nothing but silence between us. Then, you. His voice was raw, hoarse from the smoke. His body swayed, his hands gripping the railing for support. The flames roared behind him, a wall of fire stretching toward the sky. You did this, he rasped. I tilted my head, watching him. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. He took a step forward, then another. I let him get close enough to see the look in my eyes, to see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Then I stepped back and let the house finish what I had started. The flames reached the roof, sending sparks flying into the night. Glass shattered as the windows burst, unable to withstand the heat. The house was dying, and I didn't look away. Not when my father stumbled, his body sagging, his strength failing. Not when he turned back toward the house, his instincts telling him to save what couldn't be saved. Not when the porch gave out beneath him, sending him crashing to the ground. I watched, and I felt nothing. The fire raged long into the night. By the time it burned itself out, there was nothing left but black and wooden smoke curling toward the stars. The house was gone. My father was gone. And I was free. For real this time. I turned away, my pulse steady, my hands loose at my sides. I didn't run. There was no reason to. I had nowhere to go. But I had a direction. A name. An address. My sister was out there somewhere, living a life without fear, without pain. And now, I was going to find her. Not because I needed saving, but because I was finally ready to live. I didn't look back as I walked away from the ruins of my childhood. The flames had done their work, turning the past into ash. The house, my father, the fear, all of it was gone, erased by fire and smoke. But fire alone couldn't burn away the scars. I still felt them, buried beneath my skin, reminders of every rope, every chain, every whispered rule that had once bound me. But now, they weren't shackles. They were armor. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming someone new. The road stretched before me, empty and endless. The sky was still dark, the stars fading as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. My stomach ached from hunger, my body sore from exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I had a destination, a name, my sister. She had escaped long before I did. She had made it out and survived. And now, I was going to find her. But first, I had to survive on my own. I made it to the next town by morning. It was nothing special, just a cluster of rundown buildings, a gas station, and a diner that smelled of burnt coffee and grease. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The air was warm, thick with the scent of frying bacon. My stomach growled. I took a seat at the farthest booth, my back to the wall, my eyes scanning the room. The few customers inside barely glanced at me. Just another tired kid with nowhere to go. A waitress approached, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile. "What can I get you, hon?" I hesitated. I had money now, stolen money, but I had to make it last. "Just coffee," I said. She gave me a knowing look, but didn't press. A few minutes later, she set down a steaming mug and slid a plate of toast beside it. "On the house," she said before walking away. I stared at the food, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I wasn't used to kindness. It felt strange, foreign, like something I wasn't sure how to accept. But I was hungry. I ate. I stayed in that town for a few days, long enough to get my bearings, to figure out my next move. I needed a new name, a new identity. The person I had been, the scared boy locked in a house of horrors, was dead. I needed to become someone else. Someone untouchable. I found a thrift store and bought a new set of clothes. Dark jeans. A plain hoodie. I cut my hair in the gas station bathroom, watching as the pieces of my old self fell into the sink. Then I walked out, leaving the boy I had been behind. Over the next few months, I built a life from nothing. I learned how to blend in, how to disappear. I paid for a fake ID from a man who asked too few questions. I found work in places that didn't care about paperwork. Kitchens, warehouses, night shifts where no one looked twice at a kid with empty eyes and a steady hand. I was smart with my money. I watched. I listened. And I learned. Money wasn't just survival, it was power. And I was done being powerless. I started small. A few stolen bills here and there. A forgotten wallet. An abandoned credit card. Then I got better. More careful. More calculated. I learned which places didn't check too closely, which scams worked best. I studied the people around me, how they talked, how they moved, how they spent their money. I wasn't just stealing to survive. I was building something. A future. A name that meant something. A name that no one could ever take from me. By the time a year had passed, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. I had more money than I had ever dreamed of, tucked away in accounts under names that weren't mine. I had a place of my own, small but safe, far from anyone who had ever known me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. But freedom wasn't enough. Not yet. Because no matter how much I built, no matter how far I ran, one thing never changed. The memories. The past. The fire had burned the house to the ground, but the ghosts still lingered. And I wasn't the type to let ghosts haunt me. I started looking for them. My parents. I knew they had survived. I had heard whispers in the places that traded in secrets. An older couple, running, hiding, drowning in debt and desperation. They had lost everything. And they were terrified. Good. It wasn't enough. Not yet. I had spent my whole life being their prisoner. Now, it was my turn to make the rules. I tracked them down the same way I had built my life. Carefully, methodically, with patience that had been beaten into me. I followed their trail through cheap motels, rundown apartments, abandoned debts. They were running, but they weren't running fast enough. And soon, they would see what I had become. Not a victim, not a survivor. Something worse. Something they had created with their own hands. I wasn't just looking for revenge. I was looking to teach them a lesson. One they would never forget. The first time I saw them again, they didn't see me. They had no idea that I was watching. They had no idea that I had spent the last year hunting them down, tracking every move they made, every mistake that led them here, to this miserable, rotting motel on the outskirts of a city where no one cared who they were. It was pathetic. They had once ruled our house like gods, towering over me, over my sister, their voices law, their punishments final. But now they were just two people barely scraping by, running from the ghosts they had created. Their power was gone, and they had no idea that I was the one who had taken it from them. I had followed their downfall from a distance. After the fire, they had nothing. The house was gone. The money I had stolen had left them stranded. My father's injuries had made it impossible for him to find work. My mother, well, she had never been anything but a shadow, and now that shadow had nowhere left to hide. They had spent the last year drifting from place to place, always looking over their shoulders, as if expecting something worse to find them. And now, I was here. I had found them, and their world was about to collapse for good. The motel was a stain on the edge of the city, the kind of place that smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, buzzing softly, casting an eerie red glow across the cracked pavement. Their room was on the second floor. I had watched them check in the night before, my hood pulled low, my hands in my pockets as I stood beneath the shadow of a broken street lamp. They hadn't noticed me. They never would. They had no idea that their lives were already in my hands. I waited until the morning to move. They would be tired, weaker. I walked into the motel lobby like I belonged there, nodding at the half-asleep clerk behind the desk. The place had no security, no cameras. It was exactly the kind of place where people disappeared without a trace. I took the stairs two at a time, my pulse steady, my breath even. Room 208. I stood outside, listening. Inside, I could hear them moving slow, exhausted. I could hear my father coughing, my mother muttering something under her breath. Their voices were quieter than I remembered. Smaller. I knocked. Silence. Then, "Who is it?" My mother's voice, sharp with suspicion. I smiled. I had waited for this moment for so long. "A job offer," I said. I heard the locks click open. The door swung inward just enough for me to see my mother's face. She had aged. Her skin was paler, stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes, once filled with cold calculation, were hollow now, empty. She blinked up at me, confused. She didn't recognize me. Not at first. Then, realization dawned, slow and creeping, draining the color from her face. Her lips parted. I stepped forward, forcing her back into the room, shutting the door behind me. "Miss me?" I asked. My father was on the bed, his leg wrapped in a brace, his face shadowed with exhaustion. He looked up at me, his brow furrowing. For a moment, I wondered if he would recognize me at all. Then his eyes darkened. "You." It was almost funny, the way his voice barely held any strength, the way his hands twitched at his sides like he wanted to reach for something, anything, to defend himself. But there was nothing left for him. I had taken it all. "Sit down," I said. Neither of them moved. I pulled out the knife. Now, they obeyed. For the first time in my life, they obeyed me. I watched as my mother sank into the chair near the window, her hands gripping the arms so tightly her knuckles turned white. My father shifted on the bed, his breath shallow. "You've been running," I said, pacing the small room, letting my fingers trail along the chipped wooden dresser, the peeling wallpaper. "You thought you got away." They said nothing. I smiled. "But you didn't," I continued. "You never could. Because you made a mistake. You let me live." My mother flinched. My father scowled, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "You're a coward," he spat. I tilted my head. "Am I?" I gestured around the room, at their crumbling existence, the filth, the failure. "I burned your house down. I took everything from you. And look at you now," I said, my voice calm. "You're nothing." My father tried to push himself up, but the pain in his leg made him wince. "You think you're strong now," he growled. "You think that makes you better than me?" I crouched beside him, close enough that he could see the cold, steady certainty in my eyes. "No," I said. "Not better." His breathing hitched. "Worse." I stood, pacing again, letting the silence drag on, letting them feel the weight of what was coming. "Do you remember the basement?" I asked, my voice soft. My mother stiffened. My father's fingers curled into the sheets. I nodded. "I do," I continued. "I remember the chains, the darkness, the way you laughed while I begged." Neither of them spoke. I stepped closer, looking down at them, two broken people who had once played God in my life. "Now it's your turn," I said. My mother's breath hitched. My father's eyes widened. But before either of them could move, before they could beg or fight or try to run, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the syringe. It was over quickly. The drug worked fast, sending them into darkness before they could even try to scream. Their bodies slumped, their heads lolling. I watched them for a moment, listening to the sound of their slowed breathing. Then I grabbed the rope, the same kind they had once used on me, and I started tying the knots. By the time they woke up, everything had changed. They weren't in the motel anymore. They were in a different room now. A darker one. A smaller one. A room with no windows. No doors. Just four walls, thick and unbreakable. And me, standing on the other side of the glass, watching. They were the prisoners now. And the game had only just begun. The first thing they felt was the cold. Not the kind that bites at your skin from an open window or a winter wind, but the kind that settles in your bones, in your chest, in your mind. The kind of cold that tells you something is terribly, irreversibly wrong. My mother stirred first. A slow, groggy movement. Her head lolled to the side, her breath shallow. Then came the twitch of her fingers, the tightening of her jaw. A sharp inhale as the fog of the drug lifted. She tried to move. The chains rattled. Panic hit her all at once. She jerked against the restraints, her breathing sharp and uneven. The metal links clanked against the concrete floor as she twisted, testing the bindings around her wrists, her ankles. Trapped. She turned her head, wild eyes searching, and there he was, my father. Still unconscious. Still slumped over, his body heavy with dead weight. But he would wake soon. And when he did, he would understand. This wasn't a motel room. This wasn't a city street. This was nowhere. And there was no way out. I stood behind the glass, watching. The room was exactly how I had planned it. Dark, windowless, soundproof. Thick concrete walls. A single, dim light overhead, flickering just enough to remind them that they were alive, but only just. The chains were bolted to the floor. The shackles wrapped tight. They weren't getting out. Ever. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of their new reality sink in. Then I pressed the intercom button. Good morning. My mother flinched at the sound of my voice. Her head snapped toward the speaker in the corner of the room. I took my time stepping into view. She saw me through the glass, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not annoyance. Not impatience. Fear. I smiled. It's been a long time, I said. She didn't speak. Didn't blink. Just stared at me, as if trying to convince herself that I wasn't real. That this wasn't real. But it was. And it was just beginning. Behind her, my father groaned. A slow, painful sound. His fingers twitched, his body shifting. Then his breath caught. I saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. The tension in his shoulders. The stiffness in his hands. The small, sharp tug of his wrist against the chain. Then another. Harder this time. The rattle of metal. And then, his eyes opened. He didn't panic like she did. Not at first. He was always slower, always more deliberate. He let his gaze move around the room, taking in the walls, the chains, the flickering light. And then he saw me. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he smiled. A small, cruel, knowing smile. You think this makes you strong? His voice was hoarse, rough around the edges. But the venom was still there. The contempt. I tilted my head. You tell me. I pressed a button. The lights flickered again, then dimmed even further, casting long, jagged shadows along the walls. My mother made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp. My father pulled against the chains again, harder this time, testing their strength. But I had made sure they would hold. I knew you'd come back, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Oh. His grin widened, even as the chains bit into his wrists. You were always weak. The words should have stung. Should have done something to me. They didn't. I smiled back. So were you. Then I turned off the intercom and let the silence close in. I didn't speak to them again for hours. I let them sit in the dark, in the cold, with nothing but the sound of their own breathing and the weight of their own mistakes. They had done the same to me, once. Left me in silence. Left me in chains. Left me with nothing but fear. And now, they would learn what it felt like. Eventually, my mother broke. She always broke first. She pressed herself against the wall, her fingers twitching in her lap, her body curling inward. Her lips moved, soundless, forming half prayers, half pleas. She had never been religious before. I guess fear has a way of making people believe in things. My father, though, he stayed still, controlled, waiting, like he thought he could outlast me, like he thought this was a game he could still win. I almost laughed. The next time I spoke, my voice was calm, steady. You always said that strong people survive. I saw my father's jaw tighten. I took a step closer to the glass. Well, I said, tilting my head. Let's see how strong you really are. Then I turned on the speakers and let the noise begin. It wasn't loud. Darkness swallowed the room. A silence so thick it pressed against their skin, filling every corner, every breath, every heartbeat. The dim, flickering light that had barely held back the shadows was gone now, leaving them with nothing. No way to see. No way to mark the passage of time. Only the cold. Only the chains. Only me, standing just beyond the glass, watching, waiting. My mother broke first. She always did. I heard her breathing shift, shallow and quick, her body trembling against the metal restraints. The way she whimpered, the way her fingers twitched as if trying to grasp onto something, anything, reminded me of the nights she had left me locked in the basement, her footsteps fading as she walked away. Back then, she never listened to my screams. Now, she had no choice. Because now, she was the one trapped. And I was the one in control. My father was silent. But I could feel the tension in his body, the way his muscles coiled beneath his skin. He had always been good at hiding things. Pain, fear, weakness. But I had learned his tells. The way his jaw clenched just a little too tight. The way his fingers curled into fists, knuckles white, veins pulsing beneath the skin. The way his chest rose and fell in controlled, measured breaths, as if trying to convince himself he was still the one in charge. He wasn't. Not anymore. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of it settle into their bones. Then, I pressed the button, and the room came alive with sound. Not music, not voices. Breathing. Their own breathing, amplified, distorted, looping back through the speakers. A relentless echo of every sharp inhale, every hitched sob, every uneven gasp. They tried to speak, but their own voices swallowed them whole, twisting their words into something unrecognizable. My mother sobbed. My father flinched. I watched. I waited. Then I spoke. "You always told me fear makes you stronger," I said, my voice smooth, steady, echoing through the room. "That pain teaches lessons." The chains rattled as my father shifted, but he said nothing. My mother shook her head, her breath stuttering between choked gasps. "Please," she whispered. "Please, stop." I smiled. "Stop?" I tilted my head, as if considering. "Like you stopped when I begged?" The silence that followed was sharp. She had no answer. She never would, because we both knew the truth. She had never stopped. She had never listened. Not when I was a child, crying in the dark. Not when my sister ran. When my father tightened the chains, when the walls of that house closed in on us, suffocating, relentless. She had let it happen. And now, she was the one suffocating. Now, she was the one begging. And I was the one who would decide if she ever took another breath. I turned the speakers off. Let them sit in the silence. Let them feel the weight of it, the emptiness, the way time stretched in the dark, endless and merciless. Then, I flicked the lights back on. The dim bulb buzzed overhead, casting jagged shadows against the walls. They flinched at the sudden brightness, their eyes darting toward me. I stepped forward, close enough that they could see me through the glass, could see the calm in my face, the stillness in my hands. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I crouched, leveling my gaze with theirs. "You always thought I was weak," I said, voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "But you were wrong." My mother let out a soft, shuddering breath, her eyes wet, wide, desperate. "We were just trying to make you strong," she whispered. I let out a slow, humorless laugh. "You didn't make me strong," I said. "You made me dangerous." My father's lips curled in something almost like a sneer, but there was no real strength behind it. "You think this makes you powerful?" he rasped. I met his gaze. "You tell me." And then I turned on the next recording. Their own voices filled the room again. Not distorted this time. Raw. Unedited. Memories pulled from the past, from the walls of that house, from the moments they had tried to bury beneath time and silence. No mistakes. "Stop crying. You don't get to leave. No one is coming for you." The words bounced off the walls, wrapped around their bodies, coiling like chains. I watched them sink into it. My mother's breath hitched. She shook her head, her hands clenching, unclenching, as if trying to hold onto something real. But there was nothing real here. Only the past. Only the truth. And my father. He broke. Not with a scream. Not with a sob. But with silence. His shoulders sagged. His fists loosened. His breathing slowed. And when he looked at me, for the first time in my life, there was no hate in his eyes. Only fear. I smiled. "Now you understand," I said. Then I flipped the switch and left them alone in the dark once more. I didn't go far. I stood just beyond the door, listening to the silence, to the weight of their breath, to the way the chains scraped against the floor as they shifted. I had won. Not just the battle. Not just the fight. I had taken everything from them. Their power. Their control. Their sense of self. They weren't the monsters anymore. They weren't the gods of my childhood, the unshakable forces that had shaped me into something cold and sharp. They were nothing. And I was free. But freedom wasn't enough. Not yet. There was still one lesson left to teach. One final truth they had to learn. That the strongest people, the ones who survived, were the ones who never looked back. And I was done looking back. I turned away. And this time, I wasn't coming back. The room was silent except for their breathing. The chains rattled occasionally, a reminder of the weight they once forced onto me. Now, they felt it for themselves. The dim light flickered, casting fractured shadows across the concrete walls. There was no warmth in the room, no sense of time. They had spent their lives controlling others, but here they had nothing left to control. Only me. And I was the one who would decide how this ended. I watched them through the glass, my hands steady at my sides. My mother had her head bowed, her shoulders shaking, though she made no sound. My father was stiff, unyielding, his face drawn tight, his eyes dull. They had stopped speaking hours ago. They knew words wouldn't save them. But that didn't mean they weren't waiting for the inevitable, waiting for whatever judgment I was about to deliver. And I wanted them to wait. Because fear wasn't just about pain. It was about anticipation. I stepped toward the intercom, pressing the button, letting my voice break the silence. You used to tell me that pain was a lesson. Neither of them moved, but I saw the way my mother's fingers twitched, the way my father's breath hitched ever so slightly. I continued. That suffering made people stronger. That the only way to survive was to be willing to break someone else before they broke you. Still, they said nothing. I tilted my head, watching them. You were wrong. My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't look at me. My mother was trembling now. I walked into the room. Slow. Deliberate. The sound of my footsteps echoed against the walls. They didn't look up. Not yet. I crouched in front of them, balancing on the balls of my feet, my arms resting loosely on my knees. When I spoke, my voice was calm. You made me what I am. My father finally lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and I saw something new in them. Not anger. Not defiance. Something else. Something closer to understanding. And it disgusted me. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. No, I said. You don't get to speak. He shut his mouth. For the first time in his life, he obeyed me. I turned my gaze to my mother. She was shaking her head, tears slipping down her face, her lips moving in silent pleas. I sighed. You're only sorry now, I said. Not for what you did. Not for the nights you locked me away. Not for the chains, the beatings, the lies. I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. You're sorry because you lost. Her whole body trembled, but she didn't deny it. Because we both knew it was true. I stood up and stepped back. For a long moment, I just looked at them. I had spent years dreaming of this moment. How it would feel. What I would say. What I would do. I had thought revenge would taste sweeter. That it would be the final piece of the puzzle, the thing that made me whole. But as I stood there, staring at the two people who had once controlled my entire existence, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Not even pity. Just emptiness. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single key. Their eyes locked onto it. Hope flickered across my mother's face, but I saw my father's expression darken. He understood before she did. I tossed the key onto the floor between them. It landed with a metallic clang, spinning before settling into stillness. I took a step back. You always told me strength is survival, I said. I met my father's gaze. Let's see which one of you is stronger. My mother let out a strangled sob. My father was completely still. I turned away, walking toward the door, my hands loose at my sides. Behind me, I heard my mother gasp, heard the chains rattle as she scrambled toward the key, desperation in every movement. Then, I heard the sharp sound of impact. A choked cry, a struggle, and then silence. I didn't turn around. Didn't need to. I already knew how this would end. I stepped out of the room, closing the door behind me. The intercom was still on. I pressed the button and spoke one last time. You taught me to be strong. I tilted my head, listening to the sounds inside. Ragged breathing, shifting metal, the sharp, frantic movements of two desperate people fighting for control. I smiled. Now it's your turn. Then I turned off the lights and walked away. I didn't stop walking until the building was far behind me, until the night stretched before me, open and endless. The past was over. The house was gone. My parents were nothing but ghosts now, left to fight their own demons in the dark. And I was finally free. Not because I had escaped, not because I had taken revenge, but because I no longer needed it. I had won. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back.